So, under any normal circumstances, we'll be roughly midway through an election cycle, having had the last general election in 2015, which traditionally would mean that the opposition party, in this case the Labour Party, would probably be in a position of strength. If you look back at that time in the last 5-year election cycle, Ed Miliband was actually doing rather well against a Cameron coalition government. But we are in anything but usual times, and when this election was called, Jeremy Corbyn was in the worst place that a Labour Party leader had been for many a decade. At 9:30 a.m. on the 18th of April, I was sat in our offices in Westminster, and the email came through saying that the Prime Minister would make an emergency statement on the street of Downing Street outside number 10, and there was no indication what it was going to be. And that's very rare, actually. Normally in our job, there is normally some sort of guidance about what is going to happen so that we can get ourselves sorted and we can be well prepared. But what ensued then was an hour and a half of feverish speculation, as you'd expect in a world of Twitter and 24-hour news as we are. Anything from, would there be another announcement about a Scottish independence referendum? Would it be some deal on power sharing in Northern Ireland? Might she step down because of her health? We know that she suffers from type 1 diabetes. Or would this Prime Minister, who had repeatedly said that there would not be another general election, do the unthinkable, do a U-turn and announce a general election? And so we now know what the end result of that announcement was. So was it a shrewd political calculation? Did she look at the polls? Has she taken advantage of a very weak opposition? Or will that prove to be the opposite? In trying to consummate the marriage, has she perhaps spoiled the honeymoon? And perhaps that is a good place to start off the discussion. Gina, I'll put it to you first. The decision to hold an election and to break the 5-year term, was that the right thing for Theresa May to do, or was it a cynical political move?
Completely cynical political move, because this justification that it was to strengthen her mandate as we go into the negotiations is bunk, because the mandate was already there, and having a more of a majority does not increase that, in my view, and it is a view of Europe also. It was a clever move, an opportunistic one. Why not? You know, as you say, there was this vacuum for opposition. The Labour polling looked dreadful. It was a power grab, because you also remember there were 30 MPs being investigated for fraud, and if some of those had been found guilty, that majority would have been significantly weakened.
But none were, we should say.
Will be investigated. Now that's been suspended. As we know, there's none of they're all being told, or they have been told they can stand. Most elections are called because it's an opportunity to power grab, and this is no exception. I also think, thirdly, that because we haven't seen the real effects, or we haven't started to see the decay that will happen as a result of Brexit, or any of the downside in any real terms, call it early rather than later, when those will start to be seen by the general public and felt in their pockets. So I do think it was done not for the country, but for the Conservative Party.
She's a politician, after all. I mean, she's the Prime Minister. I mean, politics is all about being cynical, all about taking opportunities, taking advantages of certain situations. I mean, can you blame her, even if you do agree with Gina that it's cynical?
Well, the first thing is that she said she wasn't going to have an election. She promised the country she wasn't going to have an election. And then she lied and then had an election. Now, that doesn't improve politics or my view of her. I do think she should have kept to her word. There was an Act of Parliament which said that every 5 years we'd have an election. That was the whole point of that. And it took, I think, a supermajority to overturn that Act. So yes, the first thing is I thought it was cynical, and it made me trust her even less. There is almost, on no grounds do I trust her. This is a woman who's inflicted upon this country the most severe surveillance regime of any Western country in the world, any Western country. I just really worry about the quality of, or the integrity of the thinking in number 10. Just to go back on so many things and to so disrespect our democracy that she didn't even appear in the television debate on the day before yesterday. That seemed to me to characterise exactly what she was about. I don't know if the
introduction said that I set up the convention on Brexit a couple of weeks ago. I didn't set it up a couple of weeks ago. You can't tell it. A couple of weeks ago. Gina was the star. Gina opened it for us. The point of setting that enormous two-day event on was to underline one real problem of our democracy, is the lack of debate in Parliament and lack of debate in this election. Lack of debate in Parliament this time last year from the referendum onwards was an absolute disgrace. There was nothing. If it hadn't been for Gina, he would have not had a word about Brexit in Parliament. Gina is really the hero of our democracy at the moment. And the reason we set the convention up in the middle of the winter was a complete despair at the lack of debate in our Democratic Assembly. And that has continued through this election, because the crucial issue at stake is, what does Brexit mean for this country? Many of you may accept that we're going up. I don't accept it. But what does it mean? And I know what it means. Gina knows what it means, because I have a website which is called Brexit Record, which feeds me, we aggregate economic news on Brexit and our society. And Gina knows because she's in finance. It is a disaster for this country that the debate in this election, the crucial core debate, the core content of this election, is absent.
Okay.
Mike,
No, don't worry. Well, because we'll keep on expanding on those themes. But I'm just going to interject there. So you say that the crucial core theme is absent, and by that you mean Brexit. And I think you're probably right in many senses. I mean, if you just look at the closing statements in the TV debate that you referenced, the BBC TV debate of the other night in Cambridge, I don't think certainly Jeremy Corbyn mentioned Brexit in his closing statement. I'm not sure about the other leaders. I think Amber Rudd probably did.
founded.
But is it all about Brexit, this election, and should it be all about Brexit when you consider other issues such as social mobility, education standards?
It is all about Brexit. Brexit blights everything. And the reason for that is we cannot deliver in any of those other policies unless we have an economy that gives us the funding to right the wrongs that have been neglected by governments, not just this government, but governments for many years now. The underlying problems that we all face as Western cultures, and we face in lack of R&D, our educational system, our social care, our aging of the population, our pensions and investments industry, which is not fit for purpose, the lowest saving rate since 1963, which we're sitting on 16% of our population saving for their old age. All these issues, our environment, the environment is one that's so underplayed. Our security, none of these policies can be delivered successfully unless we have the money to fund them. The NHS is the biggest elephant in the room. I mean, none of this will work unless we have a plan. And lack of detail on what this no deal or deal means is shocking. What is the plan? If you want us to believe you, if you want us to support you as a country, because unlike Henry, I think we have to respect the democratic vote and move forwards with the process of negotiating and leaving, and then reviewing that process. What is the plan? What does no deal mean?
So you're promoting tactical voting through
Absolutely.
your Better for Britain
So on the
campaign.
day,
So what is tactical voting? Is that
So-
voting for anyone who's not the
so
Conservatives?
if I go
or
back
is
to that announcement on the 18th of April, because I had lots of calls that morning as well, and I'd been saying for months now that the Prime Minister would call an early election. Everyone told me I was wrong, that she wouldn't do that. So an hour later, I thought this is because they must have seen the figures and think they're going to get a huge landslide majority. So within an hour, I spoke to a lot of different people, and we came up with this idea of Best for Britain, because at that point in time, I thought all we can do is limit that landslide to get, I don't believe our representative system in Parliament is broken. I just think we don't have strong enough people there with real principle and backbone of all parties who will hold whichever government to account. So the two things that we wanted to do, actually three things. One was to encourage turnout, because turnout in the last election for the under 25s was only 43%. And this is their futures. This is going to blight them more than us. And also, it was a very low turnout amongst women. So the first thing we wanted to do was get turnout out. We've managed to do that. We've managed to affect over 1 million young people registered this time.
Let me just,
by the
hang on a sec, let me just
22nd.
pick you up on turnout, because these are the figures from, let's be clear, these are the figures from recent elections. So in 2015, the last general election, turnout was 66.2%, okay, the highest it's been since
But
1997.
78% of that were over 65s.
72.2% in the EU referendum the following year, so last year.
Again?
Although that was a slightly different referendum.
Yes.
It was a referendum. It was a binary choice.
Again, the elderly massively outweighed the young people.
2015, 58% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted. Again,
Well, anyway.
well, yeah, I think your figure was under 35s.
Yes.
But 18 to 24s, which is
Yes.
normally the sort of category that people try and to get to vote.
Yes.
So the overall trend, I mean, although in the last 100 years has gone down, the overall trend over the last decade has been that turnout is starting to increase.
Starting to, but it's not high enough. And also, there is an apathy. I'm out on the doorstep. I'll get on to the people we're supporting. There is an apathy. People are fed up of voting, elections. They're exhausted. And I have to say, I think it's one of the reasons why the Lib Dems are not cutting through, because they keep mentioning the second referendum. And I think people are thinking, not another referendum. So I think that's partly to do with why they're not cutting through. That's just
Well,
my
that's not
view.
safe for the SNP.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's just my view on the doorstep in England, not in Scotland. But we need to have young people out to vote. So, and that will make a massive difference. So we've done that. That's the first bit we've done. Obviously, we need them to actually turn out on the 8th of June. So registering to vote is the first challenge. Getting them to turn out on the 8th of June is the other, which we are spending a huge amount of time and effort doing. But more importantly, it's the calibre of the MPs. So what we've done is we've made 573 recommendations on a tactical voting website saying, don't think central, leave your tribalism aside for the moment. Because Brexit is the biggest issue that will dominate our futures, vote for a local MP or candidate who you think will be a strong candidate in Parliament, hold whichever government to account, and back a full and free, meaningful vote at the end of the negotiated period, so that both houses can vote. Because if we can have a free vote on fox hunting, why can't we have a free vote on Brexit?
Henry, 2014 Scottish independence referendum, 2015 general election, 2016 EU referendum, 2017 another general election. I mean, does that lead to voter fatigue, or does that lead to sort of greater engagement in the political process because people don't have time to turn off?
Your figures, I mean, I hate the way that politics dominates our lives. And I think a lot of other people do, but your figures would indicate that there's people turning on, doesn't it? That
Yeah, well, I mean,
people
if you
being
go
voted.
back to 1987, 75.3% turnout, 1992, 77%, so it was higher then. But then if you look over the 90s and into the 2000s, we are now back on an upward trend.
Yeah, because that's because we've become a more polarised society. That's number one. And two, because the issues are really important and mean a lot to people. Brexit meant a lot to people. I disagree with Gina, but it's the only thing we disagree with.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we do disagree on.
Because I am a fervent supporter of a second or third referendum. It would be a third referendum. Because I think the conduct of the last campaign on both sides was dishonest and misleading. And I certainly think that of the Leave side. I think we now live in the reality of what Brexit means. We actually are not living the Brexit reality yet, but we will be in 2 years' time. And that is really
deleterious to the public finances, to a point that
actually the end.
will not be able to function in the way that the government promises it will. So I do believe that people should be given a final say on this in March, in 23 months. 22 months' time. I think it's the only reasonable thing. It's the only thing that will give the people who claim that people have spoken an answer. I also do not have the faith that Gina does in our politicians. In the last Parliament, 3/4 of MPs supported remaining in the EU. They didn't do anything to further that aim in the 6 months after the referendum. They didn't. The party leadership just sat on them and dictated to them. So I don't see much evidence for these MPs of individual conscience and spirit supporting what is sensible for this country. I think they go along with what their party leaderships say. So that's why I and Gina do fall out over the question of the second referendum. I believe less and less in Parliament, and I think this should be returned to the people. Then we go back to the parliamentary system. But I do not think, I will make this last one, I know I bang on too much about it. Apologies if I become fanatical. But I do not think that the last year's referendum can be overturned by anything other than another referendum.
I mean, this is to both of you, though. I mean, second referendum or not, to one side, if Theresa May wins a greater majority from this election, and actually, you know, well, all I can say is I would slightly ignore what the polls that have splashed on the front page of the papers.
Yes,
and,
I would.
You know, listen to what's on the street and
Yes,
actually the psephologists privately. And it does look as though she'll win a large majority. Well, you know, that is the election.
But I think
that is the election, the electorate voting and supporting Theresa May.
It is.
And Brexit, her message of Brexit means Brexit. So
can I just say, it's also voting against Jeremy Corbyn, who frightens a lot of the people, you know. And so
well, they could vote for Tim Farron, who's furthering your cause of having a second referendum. I mean, he is that alternative.
Yeah, I think when you've got a hard right government and you've got a hard left opposition, the choice becomes binary. Whether you like, I mean, I'm a man for the centre. I believe in the wisdom of the centre, but that choice is now binary in this election, and I think people are looking at they're looking at Corbyn, and he just frightens them. And so that they say, well, she seems a reasonable person. She may not turn up to debate. She's pretty charmless and second rate, but she's better than Corbyn. You know?
So this time of the week she has a majority of 80. That's the public saying we support her, is it?
I mean, when I started the tactical voting initiative, everyone said it would not work. There's no chance. It's pointless. You're wasting your money, time, effort. I've heard it before in my court case. Can I say where we are now? We have thousands and thousands of people who are having conversations about tactical voting and actually are understanding and embracing it. I'm out on the doorstep with our champions, and I'm until the last vote is counted, we will not know what that majority is. I do, however, think there will be a Conservative win. If we can chip away at whatever that majority is, then we would have done what I hoped we could have done in the time given. But this is not about where we are now. And I do agree with Henry that it's the best choice of a bad, making the best of a bad situation in the form of the two leaders. And I'm saying this as a Labour Party supporter. I would not vote for Corbyn, and I'm not voting for him. I'm tactically voting locally for the Lib Dems in my constituency. But it's about the process as we go forward. As a country, we've already started looking inward. Can we start talking about the reality of the promises that the Tory party is making in connection with Brexit? Look at what happened in Europe. A few months ago, it could have been the rise of populism. In France and the Netherlands, that did not happen. In fact, it looks as though Macron is going to make a huge gain in the National Assembly. What that will do is that the Franco-German motor will be totally re-energized and bring together the reforms that are so needed in the EU. The EU needs a lot of reform. What is happening on the world stage of all these trade deals that we're going after? Actually, the EU is getting there before us. The US is far more advanced in its talks with the US than we are. The EU, is far more advanced. When it comes to the BRIC countries, we do 44% of our trade with the EU. We do 8% with all the BRIC countries combined. What about Ireland? Ireland has said, I met with the Attorney General 2 Fridays ago. They are going to go for unification. They are going to go after our business and trade and financial services. They do not owe us anything, is their view. We do more trade with Ireland than we do with the top 10 Commonwealth countries. What is our reality on the world stage? It is not the reality and the opportunities that the Leavers are promising us, or the Tory parties promising us. I want them to spell out what they are promising us, because so far, everything they've said is a lie. And I'm sorry, but authority is not the truth. It's truth that should be the authority in this election and all our political systems. And that is not happening.
I just want to get back to sort of the engagement side and, how well you think those messages are getting across or otherwise in this election.
Which? The messages of the leaders?
The messages of the leaders, the messages of the parties.
The
Do you think
message
they're,
is-
do you think they're hitting through?
I think Corbyn has obviously done very well in the last 2 weeks. I mean, he's cut a lead of, I think, 20 points to something like just 3.
Well,
Okay, well,
there's a trend. We probably disagree in what the polls say, but there's a trend.
well, look, I mean, let's get...
An average poll, wasn't it 20 to 3? Anyway, it doesn't matter.
A poll of polls, I mean, the Independent's poll of polls yesterday had Conservatives on 44%, Labour on 35%. If you look anywhere, I mean, YouGov poll yesterday had a 3-point lead for the Tories,
Right.
whereas ICM and Comrades had it for 12 points. So there is a great disparity between a number of polls out there.
All right. Okay.
But it's a trend. It's now.
The trend is that he's done quite well. I
Yeah.
think the manifesto is quite well. I think he personally has done quite well. He appears more relaxed and authentic than she does, and I didn't expect that to be the case. No, I expected that to be the case. I didn't expect him to be quite so good on TV as he has been, and I think he looks relaxed and confident, and that always does appeal to people. I think his message and the manifesto were both pretty coherent. You know, I don't agree with a lot of it, but I think they were coherent, and for my children's age, and my children in their late 20s and early 30s, really appealing. And that age group are really, really...
Is it? Why? What draws them in particularly?
I think it's stuff about housing,
Yeah.
student loans, and distribution of wealth. I think those things really aren't cutting through with the younger generation.
Labour tends to attract the younger generations anyway, the university students. That's
Well, that
the
wasn't the
18,
case when I was... no, it wasn't always the case.
But if the younger generations turn out to vote in greater numbers, it normally benefits the Labour Party.
And yes, it will this time too. And I think it's going to be very exciting Thursday, Friday. Really exciting Thursday, Friday next week, because we will see a lot of stuff that we've all been predicting and hazarding guesses about, and we'll see what the reality is.
Do you have, do you have children of voting age as well?
Yes, I do.
I mean, where are they sort of... I mean, if they're engaging, where are they engaging? We're talking sort of
Well,
Facebook,
trust,
Twitter,
I think apart
etc.,
from the
or
issues, it's
television?
also trust. Because a lot of young people, the message I'm getting, bearing in mind, I've been around the country and we've spoken to millions of young people, both through social media and face-to-face, is 2 things. One is, why bother to vote? Because we don't trust any of them. So trust is a really big issue. And with Corbyn going out, he's done really well. He's coming through as the authentic character that young people trust in particular. The second thing is, why bother to vote? Because our vote's not going to make a difference. Nobody's listening to us. And actually the messages and the policy messages that Labour have in their manifesto are speaking to young people. So I think they will turn out to vote, when they turn out to vote, which we hope we'll get them out to vote, and women as in particular, don't forget that, you know, women were quite low turnout. The data on gender turnout is pretty poor, which I find quite extraordinary. But, you know, over 200,000 more women have registered this time to vote. And they tend to vote for either the Greens, Lib Dems or Labour, because they're concerned about the environment, they're concerned about wealth distribution, NHS and education. And those are the things that I think in combination, that bigger turnout, if we can get it, of women and young people, will benefit all 3 parties, actually.
John, more statistics on diversity.
Yep.
So 3,306 candidates are standing this year,
Yep.
which is the fewest apparently since
Yeah, I meant
1992.
voting, but yes, okay.
983 of them are female candidates, which is a new record. It was 947 in 2015, but still 983 out of
That's fantastic.
3,306. You know, we're still talking fewer than a third,
Yes.
you know, which is not representative of the wider public. And just finally, the Conservatives, 182 of them candidates are female, Labour 256, and Lib Dems 184. I mean, is that a problem?
Yes, it is a problem.
Diversity,
It is a
gender
huge
and race.
problem. And I'll tell you, I completely understand from my experience why women are not standing up to become MPs. Because the minute you become, I didn't appreciate what female MPs have to put up with. Because of everything I've experienced, the death threats, the insecurity I now have, all the things that have happened to me and my family, I have met MPs who, and they say, we're really sorry, Gina, but it's normal. They all keep telling me it's normal. And I want them to stop saying that. And I've said, would you please stop saying it's normal? Please stop normalising this. And what I've got from a group, I held an event at the House of Commons with 80 female MPs. And the things they came out with shocked me. One of the things that was said was, if we complained, we perceived we would be seen as weak. So we don't complain when we get these things. We don't complain. The men definitely do not get trolled or do not get the death threats that we get. You know, to be called, the number of MPs, when I asked the question, I said, I'm repeatedly, I get things being said to me that I should be the second Jo Cox. And I said, how many of you, bearing in mind there were 80 female MPs in the audience, I said, how many of you get similar threats? Over half of them put their hands up. They now have someone like Tulip Siddiq, has her surgeries in Jewish mosques, Jewish synagogues or mosques, because they have security there. She has security to do her surgeries because she can't go out. That is why we don't have a lot more female MPs, because women are frightened of putting their head above the parapet and becoming involved in politics. And that's a situation that has to change. Women should be able to exercise their civic duty without fear of death or of being vilified in the most horrific ways. And I didn't know that was happening.
Yeah, and yes, it is extraordinary, and it is shocking.
But this is Britain. What is going on?
I mean, can I jump in on that?
Yeah, do.
I'm always affected when Gina talks about this. And one of the things I think has been lacking is, since the referendum, when things did turn nasty, 100% increase in hate crime, and to see casual racism on the street. This is unacceptable. And what's particularly worrying has been no leadership from either party.
Any of the politicians?
No leadership is going on television and saying, this is Britain. Our standards are higher. We don't behave like this. And that is what particularly upset me after Jo Cox murder and after your treatment. Now, the other factor of this, real decline, I think, in the standards of this country, are the newspapers, the 4 or 5 Brexit newspapers who behaved quite disgracefully in the last 7 to 10 months. Now, you may read the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Express. I am for people reading what they want, and for journalists and like myself writing what they want. But the standard of xenophobia in the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Express over the last 9 months is a national disgrace. And it has helped create an atmosphere which allows these sorts of attacks that Gina puts up with on a daily basis to occur with impunity. And I think it's a great shame that we haven't got the kind of moral leadership coming through from politicians. It seems so easy to do. That's what's so extraordinary. It's so easy to go on TV and say, this is not us. But they don't.
I'm going to open it up to questions in just a minute. Gina, a female Prime Minister, does that help matters at all?
I am, forget about just politics, but throughout my work in the world of investment charities, I'm not interested in gender. I'm an equal, so I'm interested in the best person doing the job. And I'm not somebody who thinks, I don't believe in positive discrimination or quotas or any of those things. It should be equal opportunity for the best person in the job. That's all I'm interested in.
But having the political leader of the country as only the
No,
second,
Margaret
only sometimes,
Thatcher.
do you think that will encourage more
No, Margaret
women to
Thatcher,
go into
I mean,
politics?
I happen to have known her when she had good and bad days because I was one of the main funders of the Lady Thatcher infirmary at the Chelsea Pensioners Hospital. And I can tell you, Mrs. Thatcher did not particularly like women. I mean, she thought we were weak and, so this whole idea that having a woman Prime Minister is somehow going to engender equality in the country is nonsense.
Right. Questions. And do ask them to either Henry or Gina or me if you really want to. Anyone got a question? We've got about 20 minutes.
Anyone voted Brexit in this room, just so I know who I'm talking to? Right, okay, well, brave of you to put your hand up. Because I'm very keen on this because...
Yeah, we need to have debate.
I've just explained when we ran the convention, I was very keen for a mixed audience, and we got a completely Remain audience, but we had very mixed speakers, so just wanted to know.
Yeah, I mean, like to say, I completely understand why a lot. I mean, we're in a very interesting bubble here in London. We own a number of businesses in the north of England, and I can see completely why people voted Brexit. Now, we'll get on to, or maybe not, why I did, but the dysfunctionality of the EU was principally the main reason I did, and I don't think it can be fixed. I mean, I think everyone in this room would have liked there probably not to have been a referendum, and for matters to be very different. But from my point of view, you could fix it far better from outside than you could inside. And you know, I don't know, you know, we all had different reasons for voting Remain or Brexit, but there have been 25 years of problems building up, and maybe we needed a nadir to try and sort them out. As you say, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 years. My life is mostly external anyway, so probably for selfish reasons, it didn't really affect me, but it does. I can completely understand the reasons a lot of people in the country did.
I mean, that gentleman was one of 52%. I mean,
Can I say that? So I was on the road the October before the referendum, and I came back to London 2 months, and I said we were going to lose, and that Leave were going to win. And the team I was working with were so arrogant, largely London-based, who said, "Don't worry, Gina. As a culture, we do not take risk. So people will not take this risk." They hardly ever left London. I was in Minehead. I mean, I'll tell you an anecdote. I was in Minehead going to Lions Den in a very aggressive Leave meeting. And they were shouting through me, and one gentleman was just repeatedly shouting at me, "We're leaving you, no, you won't be here anymore, everyone like you is going to go, no more." It was all about immigration. And he kept saying this, and I said to him, "You do realise when we leave the EU, people like me are not going to stop coming?" And he said, "Yes, all of you are going to stop coming." And I said, "Actually, it might be more people who look like me that come, because you need people to work in the UK. Our economy is not going to be able to sustain itself with level unemployment." He said, "I don't care. And I don't care about you rich people in London. I don't care about any of you." And he said the phrase that I think epitomizes why a lot of people outside of London voted Leave. He said, "My life is shit, and I want you to know that."
Can I make, Henry, to you, can I make the suggestion that one of the causes of Brexit was a lack of engagement? I mean, I certainly noticed on, if this, I mean, this is entirely unscientific, but I noticed on my Facebook feed in the days after Brexit, people mourning Britain's sort of departure from Europe. But what slightly frustrated me was that I'd never seen any of those people show any sort of sense of engagement in Europe or the EU.
That's true.
I doubt many of them can name an MEP beyond Nigel Farage and maybe Dan Hannan. I doubt many of them had voted in their European elections, and yet suddenly we were faced with this kind of, jaw-dropping reality. I mean, do you agree with that? Is there a fault there that we were?
That's true.
Well, I think a lot of things. I think most of us took it for granted. Most of us took what was a very, very beneficial arrangement for granted. And I think last year the Remain campaign was absolutely atrocious
Yes.
in expressing how important it was for stuff not economic, for freedom of movement, for peace, for scientific exchange. These are the things that really matter to me. It's not just about the economy, and it's not just about our public finances. It's the sense of being neighbourly and cooperate.
But it's very hard to argue for the status quo, particularly when there's a lot of fake news out there.
Yeah, I think this is my reason for not backing the idea of a second referendum, because I think this is such a complex issue. I mean, I'm not a great fan of either referenda or plebiscite, because I think when we have, especially in the environment in which we exist in, which is full of fake news increasingly, and where on social media especially, or media, people are choosing the media that they're reading, which actually just, it's their viewpoint. And what I call the ghettoizing of the mind and the thought process is an environment where I don't trust people to take that vote. And the fact that after the referendum, this next day, the highest by millions on Google search was, "What is the EU?"
Was that from America then?
No, that was from the UK on UK Google by millions.
This
It
is
was the
all-
biggest search.
This is all the more reason for independent, objective television news.
This is, well, I agree with that, but what I'm saying is, I have to say, going forwards, normally I get asked, well, so what is your idea of how this negotiation, how it should happen? Actually, what I think works incredibly well with really important matters is cross-party committees. So the team I would like to see going to negotiate in Brussels is David Davis, Keir Starmer, and Nick Clegg. I would like to see cross-party negotiations happening, because I think that way we have people who understand the processes more than new people coming in, but also people who are willing to because of their experience as politicians, and especially their understanding of the structures and legalities of the EU, rather than just one party.
We'll take it one step further. Does it have to be three politicians?
No.
Could it be a group of politicians and others?
Well, I have to say, at this moment in time where I think that there are politicians, look, the amount I invested, both in, from a financial resource and personally, from a security point of view, to have the MPs just rubber stamp the fact that I put them right back in the centre of where they should be in parliamentary sovereignty, and they all went, oh, okay then, and just did that, rather than putting in the 2 amendments on EU citizens and a meaningful vote, is shameful and gets me angry every single day. But I still think, and that's why in this organisation that I formed, we are from the world of arts, academics, business. There is no politician involved in Best for Britain. And that is as a deliberate approach, because I think this idea that Brexit, everything to do with Brexit is an expert-free zone is just complete nonsense. We have to have experts, and I think the delegation should be made up of people, leading scientists, leading business people, as well as, but from a political point of view, the idea of cross-party political delegation makes more sense to me.
Any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to force you up. Yes, brilliant.
So, firstly, Gina, thank you for filling that void, because it is desperately needed, and I felt compelled to come to hear it. Having witnessed what I think is probably the biggest single shot in the foot since Suez, the question is, what, for general, everyday people like ourselves, we work in the EU, what do we do? Because at the moment, I feel there's one bit of sadness I feel from the referendum campaign, is that we didn't engage parts of white working class Britain in a way that we perhaps should have done. And the feedback they get when I travel around the country is that, what you just said, Gina, they want us to feel shit as well. And well done, because we do. I do, and I feel desperately sad. So, what do we do? I want to help, I want to do something. Where do we take this? Because I agree, Theresa's probably going to win the election, and we're on a course of 5 years that it's probably not a great deal that we can do unless our MPs do something themselves.
I'm extremely gloomy about it, for the reason that I can't see the expression of a reasonably sensible, balanced view coming through our parliamentary system. And I don't see the extra parliamentary opposition that you need to influence those MPs. So I wish there was some way, some mechanism for bringing those 16.5 million people together and saying, look, let's just be reasonable about this. Single market, for at least. Let's be reasonable about the Brits who are living abroad and the Europeans who've made their lives here. Let's just be reasonable. But I can't find that sort of centripetal reason where people come together over something which is just sheer sense. And that's what worries me, that I can't find that either outside Parliament or inside Parliament. So
I'm a bit more optimistic than Henry. I think what we need to do, in whatever walk of life we exist in, is we need to put pressure on the government to go after a transitional period. It is impossible, to my mind, negotiations will start properly in October, that in 12 months, because at the end of the process we need to come back to Parliament and then have the ratification period. It is impossible to unpick 40-odd years and over 8,000 laws or 11,000, wherever you want to talk to or whoever you want to talk to, in the space of 12 months. So surely the most sensible, logical thing for us to do is to put pressure on whoever comes into power to go for a transitional period, because all 27 member states are going to have to agree it. So why are we not starting to talk about it? Because the EU has made it plain. There are 3 things that are going to have to be settled before we start talking about a new relationship. And that's people, the EU citizens are 4 million, the 3 here, and our citizens 1 million abroad. The money, the divorce bill, because nobody's going to let us walk away from a divorce without paying a bill. And thirdly is Ireland. Unless those 3 things are sorted out, we can't even begin to start talking about our new relationship. So isn't that the most sensible option to go for?
Gentleman at the back. You might project quite loud.
Yeah, certainly. I was wondering, do you not think that public opinion may change in time? I initiated and organised Unite for Europe March in March this year. It was quite a journey for me to actually do that. I'd never been involved in politics before. But I was so utterly disgusted what happened last June. Suddenly I became, overnight, I woke up to politics. Suddenly I found myself organising a march I didn't even know I was capable of doing. But in the process, I've been very fortunate to meet some very influential people. I have many meetings at the House of Commons, many meetings at the House of Lords. I'd just like to echo what Gina said, that in many meetings I had at the House of Lords, and I met many peers from all parties. And on my second but last visit, I was shown some emails which absolutely shocked me to the core. And when I saw the emails, they basically said, Peter, you can't mention who we are anymore. I saw death threats that I could not believe could be sent. Threats upon them, upon their children, upon their children's children. That was shocking. But in the process of doing this, I've been very fortunate to meet people like Alistair Bunkall, Nick Clegg, Matt Kelly, the new Ian Paul Mason, and many other journalists. And I also had a further opportunity to interview them again for Henry at the convention a few weeks ago. And I was really struck that they had not spoken to each other about this, but all of them were quite optimistic that in the end, in the long run, that public opinion would change, that public opinion would actually go against what's happening, that Brexit would not be fulfilled. Because in time, what's going to happen to this country is going to be so catastrophic, and people's lives are going to be affected so dramatically that we would end up not leaving. And I just wonder, do you agree with that? Do you feel that actually public opinion will change?
I have two scenarios. One is I think time is on our side, which is why I'm optimistic, but I'm afraid we're going to have to go down before we go back up. But I think Brexit is going to also dominate the next election. Everyone's talking about this election. Actually, well, Mrs May has seems to indicate she's going to get rid of the Fixed-Term Parliament Act, but we will have to wait and see.
But of course there won't be another general election now, assuming that we run a 5-year term until 2022,
Yes.
which will give enough water
But this is
for
the
Brexit
thing.
to happen and then
No, you
to
see,
have
I
another
totally
election.
disagree because I can't see how Brexit is going to happen in that time frame. Because both sides, even the EU said, there's no way we can negotiate in the time in 2 years. So if you think, if you go down my train of thought, which is we have an extended transitional period, and then that brings us to basically 2 to 3 years for either a new party to form or for all these groups to come together in a progressive alliance, and people start feeling it in their pocket and seeing the reality of where we are, then normally an election starts being fought about a couple of years before. So then there's time to do that. So I think the next election will also be dominated by Brexit. I don't think it's just this one. But the other thing I would say, and I agree with you, is that there is a will to change, but it's not there yet. Because all those wonderful people you spoke about, who I meet as well, have never been prepared to stand next to me in my court case or in my Vest for Britain and be out there publicly because they're still frightened about the backlash. And that has to stop. We have to be prepared you have to be able to stand up. I mean, they won't. They're not there yet. But I think in time they will be.
I mean, Henry, there's a lot of hope out there. There's a hope that opinion might change as hope of a transitional period. The bottom line is, Article 50 has been triggered. Whichever of the two figures that could possibly be Prime Minister, whether it be Corbyn or May, have both said that they will follow through Brexit. The chances are it will be another Prime Minister May. 52% of the public voted for Brexit. It's not like, this is an unpopular move.
No, I agree with all that. That's why I'm gloomy. I do think, and I also worry about people, the penny not dropping really, with people about inflation which is taking off, about the cost of equipment of the NHS, about the 60,000 people who may leave, and the applications from the EU nationals to join the NHS have just slumped recently. All that, I hope, impacts people. I hope they understand what's going on, because I certainly see it. And in 19 months' time, it will be severe. But we have a biased press. I don't know how they're going to get that information unless they're really looking for it. And that really worries me, is that the press has become a kind of arm of government.
when it's a Conservative government. That's a real worry. I think, I do think people need to be better informed, and I think they have a duty to be informed if you're going to be a voter.
Can I mention something about Article 50?
Sure, of course.
So Article 50 is one of the worst bits of legislation ever written. It was never written to be used, but if we put that aside for one moment, the Article 50 has three parts to it. One is firing the bullet, which is what my case said, that only Parliament could be involved with, and they agreed, so the bullet has been fired. Until that bullet reaches a target, hits a target, we actually don't know which rights, whatever that end deal will be, we don't know which rights are going to be lost or diminished. So it isn't until then that there can be a full vote in Parliament again. So everyone's talking about the Article 50 bill and the Great Repeal Bill, which is at the end. Actually, my team and I believe there needs to be another Act of Parliament when the negotiated period comes back. And at the moment, Mrs May has promised a very binary deal or no deal vote. If she comes to power and that is the offer to Parliament, I will take her back to court because she is not allowed to do that. She's not above the law, and it is Parliament that both houses they're going to have to debate full and freely about which rights are lost and which are being kept, and making sure there's another Act of Parliament. So this whole idea that Article 50 has been triggered and that's it, because the other elephant in the room is nobody actually has decided whether it's revocable or not. In both the government and my case, we decided not to go down that route because of the febrile political environment in which we existed. But Mrs May, in her election speech, said, there is no turning back. She has put herself above the law again. So it may well be that that question is going to have to be asked in a court of law, because nobody's decided that.
So you say that your argument is that it is revocable?
No, we don't know. Lord Kerr himself, the Lord Kerr who wrote it, has said it is. There is an opinion called The Three Kings, which is actually written by 5 of the leading legal minds in the country, if you want to access it. And that paper says it is. The European Parliament says it is. And all the other member states, because Article 50 was not written for the UK. It was written for any member state wanting to leave the EU. And other member states are saying, we want clarity on this. So it may well be that we don't ask the question. It could be another member state that asks the question. There are lots and lots of unknowns out there still. So that's why we cannot give up hope.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, if there is one more question.
Maybe.
2. Let's try and get in the squeeze in 2. Yeah, make them quick.
Very quick. I too believe that Brexit was ultimately about immigration, partly because anyone I spoke to that was going to vote Brexit started the conversation with, this is not about immigration, this is about taking back control. So with that in mind, the backdrop to all of this, you have the master chess player Putin, who wants to see the breakup of Europe. And so for the year before the actual referendum, you had Putin bombing the hell out of Syria, creating these images on TV of mass immigration on a biblical scale. And it's almost as though the British public fell for that, given where their minds were at anyhow. I just wondered how you felt about that, because it's something that's not actually discussed.
Well, I covered that story.
Yes, you did.
I covered the migrant story for the magazine I worked on in New York. And I don't agree with you that it was entirely fixed. I mean, one of the reasons that you had a vast number of people on the road is that Germany opened its doors. And that wasn't a manipulation by Putin. And they were already massing in Turkey. There were millions of people who had left way before Putin got involved in Syria. So I don't necessarily think this is a grand manipulation. I think he's probably much more involved in Western politics than any of us understand. And certainly in France and America, there is no hard evidence. And I think he's probably involved here.
I mean, nevertheless, just quickly to bring you in, I mean, you're right, I think, in so much the imagery, and this was the fear with the German elections coming up, is that with Merkel's open door policy, if we were to see similar television pictures of migrants walking through Eastern Europe and into Central Europe, then it would affect the German elections in some way. But I mean, do you actually think
I don't think it will affect the German elections as much, because the EU member state psyche in connection with the EU is very different from ours. We joined for economic reasons to see what we could get out. We were, we had a colonialist mindset. We were pretty anti-foreigner even then. We also had the Commonwealth countries. We'd won the First and Second World War. We took the claim for all of that. So we had a different mindset. In Europe, it is about security first, not economics. So whenever leaders say to me, oh, Germans don't want to sell the cars to the UK, actually the German Automobile Association have said that they will put the security of Europe before. In terms of migration, is that successive governments have whipped both the EU and migrants for policies they have not put in place and failings that they've done. So the politics of prejudice has fed in, and it didn't happen in a few years. It's been happening for a number of years. And that's where I think people have seen it, that it's immigrant workers' fault or whoever's immigrants coming here. Actually, in London, I know the figures in London, is that for each migrant worker in London, we get 46,000 of what's called gross value added to our economy. That's 1.8 million people adding into our London economy, 83 billion a year. But we're an export-free zone. We can't tell people that. Emotionally, it's about immigration. I understand that. But the reality, I don't think, is there.
Right, very quickly. So.
Firstly, Gina and Henry, thank you for everything that you've done. We need oppositions. Please carry on. My question really quickly. Clearly, we've had a number of surprises in elections. The data would point to that. From the emotional perspective, I kind of believe things come in threes. What happens if we get a surprise in this election and it's a hung parliament? How does that play out for the next year?
The question is, what if it's a hung parliament? Okay, so enough if people didn't hear at the back.
Well, I would cheer. My mood would lift, my depression of the leader would lift, because I think it would offer some hope for sense and reason. I don't know if I prefer to listen to Gina than talk myself, but I don't know if you watched the election debate 2 days ago. I was fascinated by the division on stage between the Tories in UKIP and the others, and how much I shared with the SNP, with Labour, with Lib Dems, and the Pride Common. And I just thought, these are people, if there was a coalition of these people, I'd be happy and I could go on holiday without thinking about politics.
If we have a hung parliament, we might have another general election, heaven forbid. Can I just ask, have we got a hung audience? Is anybody here undecided as to who they're going to vote for yet? Is there still...
Visit our tactical website.
Right, and as a final question, Gina,
yes.
You talk about having strong, independent minds in Parliament, so why are you not running yourself?
Yes. 2 reasons. One is, I think if you're an MP going to politics, you should dedicate 100% of your time to politics. I have fairly young business. I have a massive campaign against all the rip-offs in the city investment industry and the charity sector. I'm quite busy. I've been doing this for 10 years. I need to complete those things first. And secondly, I don't feel I know enough. If I go in there, I want to know what I'm talking about, and I have to be ready. I'm not saying I'm not going to politics. I'm not going to politics now. And the reason also I know that is that I've grown up with politics my entire life. The irony is my father started the opposition party, a centralist, if you like, a progressive alliance against a dictator in our own country that completely changed our history. I grew up with that every day in my household as a conversation. It echoes in every part of my life. I'm not going to walk away from it, but it's not now.
Hands up if you want to see Gina run for Parliament. There you go. Right, well, I'd say...
Not this election.
Well, I can say for one thing for sure, in a week's time we will know the result of... well, 2 things for sure. In a week's time we will know the result of the general election.
And I'm going on holiday with Henry because I think we have a very good chance we have a hung Parliament.
And the second thing is that I'll probably be absolutely knackered having been up all night broadcasting. I think we probably are all agreed that there will be a Conservative government will be returned, but there'll be plenty of questions. How big is Theresa May's majority? How has Jeremy Corbyn done enough to hang on and to claim the right to remain as the Labour Party leader for the years going forward? What about the Liberal Democrats who have presented themselves as that anti-Brexit alternative, but at the moment their campaign looks as though it's not really got a lot of steam?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, if the Conservative majority is around the same we are or less,
Yeah.
do you think May will survive as leader?
For the time being, yes.
Okay.
So what if she comes back with 12, 16? Her gamble will have failed, and I think you'll find a lot of dissenting voices. And I think you'll find a move to be a more encompassing cabinet and wider governance rather than what currently exists as a small core within Downing Street. I don't think there will be an immediate coup, though, within the Conservative Party, although the Conservatives are much better at it than Labour when they see weakness.
They are much better. That's why I asked the question.
They go for it.
Because I think they are much better at it.
But I think they also realise that there needs to be an element of stability in these times. And I think by deposing their leader, who will have ultimately just won a general election, albeit not by the measures she would have wanted, I think it would be seen as being destabilising in order to get rid of her and then put someone else in power.
Okay.
And UKIP, what's going to happen to UKIP? Because the chances are they're not going to win a seat. They've got no local presence anymore. In 2019, if we leave the EU, they won't have any MEPs. And my final thing, which I think is potentially one of the most important things of this election, is what happens in Scotland. Because if the Conservatives can chip away at the SNP, then Theresa May or whoever might be Prime Minister will be able to push back on a Scottish referendum. But if Nicola Sturgeon keeps a stranglehold in Scotland, I think she'll push for a second Scottish independence referendum, and then we might even face the breakup of the United Kingdom. So, whoever said politics was boring?
So in Scotland, it's so weird. In Scotland, I would say, well, I don't want a second referendum. So I support the Tories, which I couldn't possibly do south of the border. So it's such a very weird...
A lot of dynamics at play. Well, thank you very much. I hope that was interesting, but particularly to Gina.